My mother-in-law showed up at my father's funeral with a folder. Not flowers, not a casserole, not even a card with her handwriting on the envelope. A manila folder, thick with papers, held against her chest like she'd been waiting for this moment for years. And maybe she had. I was standing next to my husband Marcus at the graveside. It was February in Ohio, cold enough that my breath came out in visible clouds, and I was wearing my father's favorite color, navy blue, because he always said black was too dramatic. I was trying very hard not to fall apart in front of the 40 or so people who had come to say goodbye to him. Dad had been a quiet man, a retired electrician from Dayton who coached Little League for 23 years and made the best chili in Montgomery County. He wasn't famous or wealthy, but the people who knew him loved him completely. We hadn't even made it back to the cars when my mother-in-law Vivian broke away from the small cluster of family and walked toward me with that folder pressed to her chest. "We need to talk," she said. Not to Marcus. To me. "There are some matters that need to be settled today." I remember thinking, today. She said today. My father had been in the ground for less than 20 minutes. I should back up because none of this will make sense without the context, and the context goes back almost 4 years. Marcus and I met in Columbus. I was 28, finishing my last year of grad school in urban planning, and he was 30, working as a structural engineer for a firm downtown. We met at a friend's birthday dinner, and by the time dessert arrived, I had already decided I wanted to see him again. He called me 2 days later. We dated for a year, got engaged, and were married in a small ceremony in September. His parents, Vivian and Roland, did not come to the wedding. They sent a card. Inside it said, in Vivian's precise handwriting, "We hope you'll understand that we cannot celebrate what we do not support." There was a check for $200 inside, which I found more insulting than the absence. Marcus and I did not cash it. What did they not support exactly? That's a question I've asked myself many times over the years. The charitable interpretation is that they had envisioned a different kind of wife for their son, someone from their social circle in Cincinnati, someone whose family had the right last name and the right zip code. My father was a retired electrician. My mother passed when I was 19. I had student loans and a second-hand car, and I rented a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood they probably wouldn't have stopped in for gas. Marcus had grown up differently. His father, Roland, was a commercial real estate developer, the kind of man whose name was on buildings. Not famous buildings, but buildings that generated income quietly and reliably, the way old money tends to. Vivian had never worked outside the home by Roland's insistence, and she treated this as a point of pride. When Marcus told them he was marrying me, Roland said, "You're making a mistake." Vivian said nothing, which was somehow worse. We got married anyway, in a small venue near campus with 32 guests and a string quartet that my friend played in. My father walked me down the aisle. He cried, but only when he thought I wasn't looking. For the next 3 years, Marcus and I built something good. We moved into a house in Dublin, a suburb of Columbus. I got a job with a city planning firm. Marcus was promoted to senior engineer. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable and stable and genuinely happy. His parents sent Christmas cards. They sent birthday cards. There was no warmth in them, but at least there was paper. The real trouble started when Dad got sick. He was diagnosed with stage 3 kidney disease in the spring, 2 years into our marriage. It progressed faster than anyone expected. I drove to Dayton every weekend for a year. I took unpaid leave when things got critical. When he died in February, it was a Wednesday morning and Marcus was with me holding my hand, and it was the worst day of my life, and also, somehow, one of the most sacred. Dad went quietly. He wasn't in pain. He'd had time to say everything he wanted to say. What I didn't know, standing at that graveside in my navy blue dress, was that his death had set something in motion. Dad's estate was not complicated on its face. He owned his house outright, a 3-bedroom ranch in Dayton he'd bought in 1991 and paid off before he retired. There were savings, modest but real, and there was a storage unit full of things that had belonged to my mother, which he'd kept for over 2 decades because he couldn't bear to let go. The house was worth somewhere around $240,000 by the time he died. Not a fortune, but not nothing. I was the sole beneficiary. I was his only child. What I learned in the weeks after his death was that Vivian and Roland had found this out before the funeral. I still don't know exactly how. Marcus didn't tell them. My father's attorney certainly didn't. My best guess is that Roland, whose business involved a great deal of property research, had found the house valuation through public records and done the math himself. He was the kind of man who did that kind of math. So when Vivian approached me at the graveside with that folder, she wasn't offering condolences. She was making a claim. "There are some matters," she said again, when I didn't immediately respond. Her voice had that particular quality it always had, calibrated, precise. Not quite warm. Financial matters that affect the family. Marcus had caught up by then. He put his hand on my arm. "Mom. Not today. It has to be today," she said. "The estate goes into probate very quickly and there are..." "Mom." His voice was quiet but firm. "Roland and I have contributed significantly to your financial stability over the years," she said, and now she was looking at Marcus rather than me. "The down payment on your home, the business loan when your firm was restructured, we've been patient. But with these new assets coming into the household, we think it's time to formalize the arrangements." I heard what she was saying. It took me a second to fully process it, the way sometimes a very cold thing doesn't register as pain immediately. She wanted a share of my father's house. She was standing at my father's grave, the dirt still fresh, and she was telling me that because her son had received financial help from them over the years, money given freely, money Marcus and I hadn't even known was categorized as anything other than parental generosity, she believed she had a legitimate claim on my inheritance. The folder, she explained, contained a document their attorney had prepared, a promissory note backdated through a series of gift-to-loan reclassifications that Roland had apparently drawn up in the past year. She held it out toward me. My hands were at my sides. "I'm not taking that," I said. "You should at least read, I'm not taking that from you today." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "My father is in the ground. We are at his funeral. Whatever you think you have in that folder can wait until I have a lawyer present." Vivian's expression shifted in a way I recognized. Not anger exactly. She wasn't a person who showed anger openly. More like a recalibration. She had expected something, and she wasn't getting it. "That's a reasonable request," Roland said, appearing at her elbow. He was a large man, 60-something, with the kind of handshake that announced itself. "But we do need this resolved quickly. The estate attorney's timeline." I said no. I looked at him directly. "Not today." Marcus's hand tightened on my arm. I wasn't sure if it was comfort or warning or both. We walked back to the cars. Vivian and Roland followed at a distance. Nobody said anything else, but she still had the folder. The next 3 weeks were some of the most exhausting of my life, and I had just buried my father, so that's saying something. Marcus and I talked. We talked more honestly than we had in years, maybe. He was devastated by what his parents had done, but he wasn't surprised, and I think that distinction matters. He'd spent his whole life navigating Vivian and Roland's particular brand of love. Generous when it served them, conditional in ways that only became visible at moments like this one. He had accepted gifts from them over the years without fully understanding the ledger they were keeping in the background. The down payment on our house, $45,000, given as what Roland called a wedding gift, belated, was in the document as a loan. The $18,000 that Marcus's firm had needed during a difficult restructuring, which Roland had wired without being asked and without any discussion of repayment, also listed as a loan. Together, $63,000, with interest calculated at a rate their attorney had apparently selected with some care. Marcus's first reaction was fury. His second was shame. His third, and I watched him arrive at this over the course of a long night at the kitchen table, was clarity. "They've been doing this our whole marriage," he said, building a case. "They were waiting for something worth claiming," I said. We sat with that for a while. I called my own attorney the following Monday. Her name was Janet, and she had handled the estate paperwork after Dad's diagnosis, so she already knew the situation. I walked her through what had happened at the graveside. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, she said, They can't touch the inheritance, you understand that. What's yours under the estate is legally yours, and Ohio law is very clear that inherited assets are separate property unless commingled. I know, I said, but the promissory note, send me everything they've given you. I'll look at it. A pause. Did Marcus sign anything? No. Good. Don't let him sign anything without calling me first. Then she said the thing I hadn't let myself say out loud yet. They did this at the funeral. Yes. Another pause. Okay, she said, and I could hear something shift in her voice. Then we're going to make sure they understand what that decision cost them. Over the next 2 weeks, Janet pulled apart the promissory note piece by piece. The backdating was not clean. 2 of the loan documents had been notarized on dates that, when cross-referenced with Roland's business travel records, were days he had been in a different state. The interest rate applied to the gift-to-loan reclassification had been calculated in a way that did not comply with Ohio's usury statutes. And critically, the documents had never been disclosed to us. Marcus had never signed a promissory note. I had never signed a promissory note. I had never signed a promissory note. There was no acknowledgement, no correspondence, nothing from the time the money was given that treated it as anything other than a gift. What they have, Janet told me, is a piece of paper their attorney drafted based on Roland's unilateral decision to retroactively call gifts loans. It has significant legal problems. And even if it didn't, even if it were perfectly clean, Ohio courts do not allow a creditor to claim against an inherited estate without specific conditions that don't exist here. Can we do anything? I asked, about the fact that they showed up at the funeral. She was quiet for a moment. The document itself was a form of legal intimidation. The context, presenting it at a funeral, targeting a grieving person, making claims against an estate before the body was even settled, that context matters. It won't result in criminal charges, but it matters in civil court if this goes that far. She paused. It may also matter to a bar complaint depending on which attorney drafted that document and how much they knew about the circumstances. I hadn't thought about that. I thought about it after I hung up. Marcus called his parents the following weekend. I sat next to him at the kitchen table while he did it, not because he needed support. He'd asked me to be there. He wanted me to hear him say it. He told them that the promissory note was legally unenforceable. He told them that Janet had reviewed the documents and identified multiple problems with how they'd been prepared. He told them that if they pursued this, we would countersue for legal harassment and file a formal complaint against their attorney with the Ohio State Bar. Vivienne said something I couldn't hear. Marcus said, "I'm not finished." He told them that the down payment and the business loan had been accepted in good faith as gifts and that we had no obligation to repay them. He told them that what they had done at the funeral was something he would not be able to forgive easily, and that it had changed something for him in a way he was still working through. Then he said, "And I need you to know that if you ever approach my wife with legal documents at a family event again, we will not be attending family events anymore." Roland said something. His voice was low and I couldn't make out the words. Marcus said, "I'm not asking for an apology right now. I'm telling you where we stand." He hung up. We sat there for a minute in the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a neighbor was backing out of a driveway. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Not really," he said, "but I will be." Here's the part that I think about most when I tell this story. 3 days after Marcus made that call, I got a letter from Janet. Inside was a copy of a formal letter she had sent to Vivienne and Roland's attorney, outlining the legal deficiencies in the promissory note and requesting that all further communication go through her office. Standard procedure. Also in the envelope was a separate, shorter note from Janet herself. She had done some additional research, she wrote, because something about the timeline of the documents had bothered her. The notary stamp on 2 of the promissory note pages, the ones with the problematic dates, belonged to a notary whose license had lapsed in the state of Ohio 8 months before the documents were supposedly signed. She had cross-referenced the notary database. She wrote, "This document was not just legally aggressive. It was fraudulently executed. I am prepared to refer this to the appropriate authorities if you would like to proceed. I read that sentence 3 times, then I called her back. What does that mean, practically? I asked. It means that whoever prepared those documents and whoever signed off on the notarization committed fraud, she said. It's a serious exposure for their attorney, possibly criminal, depending on what a prosecutor decides to do with it. Do you think their attorney knew? I think someone knew, she said carefully. Whether it was the attorney or Roland or both, I can't say, but someone knew that notary license had lapsed. I made the decision right then. I told her to file the referral. I don't know exactly what happened on Vivian and Roland's end after that because Marcus and I made a deliberate choice not to monitor it too closely. What we know is that their attorney withdrew from representing them in the matter within 2 weeks of Janet's referral. We know that the Ohio State Bar opened a review. We know that Roland, whose name appeared on the documents as a signatory, retained separate counsel. We also know that Vivian called Marcus in April, 2 months after the funeral. He told me about it afterward. She had not called to apologize exactly. She had called to say that she and Roland had made errors in judgment and that she hoped we could find a way to move forward as a family. Marcus told her he needed more time. He didn't say how much time. He didn't promise anything. He told her he would be in touch, and then he said goodbye in a tone I recognized, not angry, not warm, just finished for now. My father's house sold in June. It took 6 weeks to find the right buyer, a young couple, early 30s, with a toddler and a second baby on the way. The wife had grown up in Dayton and wanted her kids to grow up somewhere with a yard. When I walked through the house for the last time, I took the chili recipe off the refrigerator door where it had been taped in my father's handwriting for as long as I could remember. I took the Little League trophy from the mantel. I left everything else. The proceeds went into a separate account in my name only, which Janet had advised from the beginning. Marcus agreed immediately without me having to explain why. I still drive to Dayton sometimes on Sunday mornings for no particular reason. I stop at the diner my father liked on Salem Avenue and order eggs and coffee and sit by the window. I don't know why it helps, but it does. What I know now that I didn't know 2 years ago is this. Some people will wait. They will be patient for years through weddings and holidays and birthdays and ordinary Tuesdays, and they will keep a ledger the whole time, adding things up quietly, waiting for the right moment to present the bill. The right moment in their calculation is always when you are most vulnerable, when you have just lost someone, when you are still raw, still standing at the edge of a grave, still wearing the dead person's favorite color, and the answer, the only answer that works, is to not take the folder. Not today. Not without a lawyer. Not ever if you can help it. My father always said the best thing you can do when someone tries to take something from you is to know exactly what you have and who it belongs to. He was talking about property, technically, in the context of a dispute with a contractor, but I think about it differently now. I know what I have. I know who it belongs to. That's enough. I've thought a lot about what Vivian and Roland actually believed when they walked up to me at that graveside. I don't think they believed they were doing something wrong. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. They had built a story carefully over years in which the money they gave Marcus wasn't love, it was investment. And investments come with returns. By the time my father died, they had convinced themselves so completely of that story that presenting me with a folder full of fraudulent documents at a funeral felt, to them, like a reasonable thing to do. Maybe even overdue. That's what happens when you let a ledger replace a relationship. You stop seeing people and start seeing accounts. I don't say this to excuse them. What they did was calculated and cruel, and the fact that a notary stamp turned out to be expired doesn't make it less cruel. It just made it easier to fight. The cruelty was in the timing. The cruelty was in knowing I was at my lowest and deciding that was the moment to move. That choice told me everything I needed to know about how they saw me, and honestly, about how they'd always seen me. But here's what I keep coming back to. They lost. Not because of luck, because of a series of decisions I had made, slowly over years without knowing I was making them. I had chosen a lawyer I trusted before the crisis arrived. I had kept records. I had a husband who, when the moment came, chose honesty over loyalty to his parents, which is actually the harder choice, even when it looks obvious from the outside. None of those things happened by accident. They happened because Marcus and I had spent 4 years building something that could hold weight when weight was put on it, and Vivian and Roland had spent 4 years building something that looked solid but wasn't. The promissory note fell apart not because they were unlucky, but because it was built on a foundation of dishonesty, backdated documents, a lapsed notary, an attorney who either didn't know or didn't care. When Janet pulled on one thread, the whole thing unraveled. That's what dishonesty does. It holds until it doesn't. And when it goes completely. I think about my father a lot when I think about this. He was not a man who accumulated power or influence. He coached Little League. He fixed electrical panels. He made chili from a recipe he'd adjusted incrementally for 30 years until it was exactly right. What he left me wasn't just a house or savings. It was a way of being in the world. You build things carefully. You are honest about what things cost. You don't keep a secret ledger on the people you love. He would have hated what happened at his funeral. But I think he also would have recognized it for what it was. People revealing themselves. And he would have said, because he said versions of this my whole life, that the only real response to someone showing you who they are is to believe them and to act accordingly. I believed them. I acted accordingly. That's all I did. And it was enough.